It's not every day that we hear from Joe Burrow in the form of an exclusive interview. We're going to talk about his interview with complex.com, plus take your questions mostly on the defensive side of the ball in our last, maybe second to last, pre-camp mailbag.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Lisco. He's your host, James Rapine. We're on the Locked On Podcast Network, and you can subscribe to this show on YouTube or anywhere you get your podcasts, and that will make it really easy for you to join those two groups of esteemed listeners we talk about at the beginning of every show, the everydayers, those of you who don't miss an episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Even in the offseason, special shouts out for you, because we know it's tough in the offseason to stay locked in on Locked On Bengals, and you do it. We appreciate all of you who do. Also, those of you who make us your first listen, really appreciate all of you who make Locked On Bengals your first listen on your way to work or whatever you do. First thing in the morning, walking your dog, working out, making breakfast, whatever it is, we're happy to be there with you when you're doing any of those activities. And today, James, we're going to talk about this Joe Burrow interview over at complex.com. Man, it's interesting, the outlets that get Joe Burrow for exclusive interviews. Last year it was, or 2 years ago? Last year it was one single podcast. This year it seems to be complex.com, and that is about it. And what stood out to you? Let's just start there. What was the big takeaway from you as you read this interview?
You sound bummed, but I don't know if we've given Joe the official invite. Obviously it's an open invite, but now let's put it on video, on record here. Joe Burrow, you're officially invited for a 2-on-1 sit down on the Locked On Bengals podcast. And
he will see this, of course.
We could do this, during training camp, before or after practice. We could do this right after you wake up. If you want us to come to the Burrow house, which it probably looks like Michael Rubin's these days. Yeah, whatever the case is, we could do it. But yeah, Jake, the interview, I enjoyed it because there was a few noteworthy quotes, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners and viewers saw them. First, let's start with the trash talk, because it's Bengals and Chiefs. It's the NFL's best rivalry. And I love this, by the way, side note, that the Bengals rivalry is with the Chiefs. And we're not talking about like Bengals Steelers, which just is really for the majority of the life of the Bengals franchise. That has been their biggest rivalry dating back to the 70s, when Terry Bradshaw said he hated the Bengals and was really adamant about trying to beat them. But we obviously had the Pat Who comment with Jamar Chase. They asked him about that, and Mahomes' response and Travis Kelce's response. And he said, quote, "The best thing about it is that it's settled on the field, so we'll see them in December." It's great. It's a very Joe Burrow line, not going to feed the flames, feed the fire, all of those things. So that stood out. His relationship with Jamar Chase, he touched on that. And I think there's not much more that our listeners need to know about that he said or revealed. Like, I think that nationally it might be relevant because not everyone knows the story of Joe and Jamar. But if you listen to this podcast regularly, you certainly do. But the other part of it was the getting over the hump part. And it makes sense, right? Given where the state of this team, and we've talked about the different veterans that could walk out the door in free agency next year. And so them asking him that, especially after minicamp, when he used the word urgency multiple times to describe how the locker room is viewing this season about winning and kind of finishing the job and winning a Super Bowl. And as far as getting over the hump, he said, well, we don't have to do anything too different. Keep doing exactly what we're doing. We've put a great plan together the last couple of years. We just have to finish it off. And that's the sort of like Burrow poise where I guess you could say there's more pressure on this team than any other Bengals team, arguably in franchise history. If you wanted to look at it that way, you could, because the expectations are so high. And he's like, we just got to keep, his normal Burrow sigh. I'm sure he probably did that. We just got to do what we normally do and what we've done and just finish it off this time. So I like that. That certainly stood out to me.
It's a mantra you've heard from not just Joe Burrow, but other players on this team, from coaches on this team, where they feel like they have a plan. They feel like they have the experience. They know what has gone into the Super Bowl run, the AFC Championship run, which came a whiskers with away from making it back to the Super Bowl. They know what goes into those efforts and how much work that is. And they know what's gotten them there. They know they have some new faces. They know what the problems have been. I think that there's a good amount of self-awareness on this team. And, we've knocked them in the past for having some blind spots internally in terms of self-scouting. And I think that they've largely gotten past a lot of that. I think there's still some of it probably, but I think that their ability to recognize where their roster is, understand the strengths and weaknesses of the roster, make adaptations in season as they need to, and then have a good off-season plan every year. For the last few years, we've seen this to address those weaknesses is something that we've really seen come a long way for them. So when you think about all of those factors, I think that Joe Burrow's comments there really make a lot of sense. I think another thing that's really kind of a throwaway line, but was interesting to me, that helped paint the white party, which I was not very interested in, as some of our listeners noticed, paint that in a new light, was what he said about it, which is just that for him, and it was a good question, I thought, it's not this like crazy celebrity party as it's perceived to everyone on the outside. For him, it's a place where he's not going to get mobbed by fans, right? Like, there are going to be people, I'm sure, that come up to him and be like, "Hey man, I'm a big fan," but it's a different level, right? And he said it's just a comfortable space. He talked about it as, yeah, it's just a place where I can, it's just good people that want to have a good time. And it kind of normalized it in a big way. It's just like, yeah, it's just a place where he could be more of a normal guy. And I'm sure he appreciated that about it.
I think the question is perfect for Burrow because it allowed him to downplay it, right? But and he's been a mega star for a couple of years now. I mean, it's not new. Really, that 2019 season is what kicked it off. So he's used to it. And it probably feels like ages ago when he wasn't at this type of level. But he's reaching another level. That's what that party signified. And he might not realize it yet, but that Super Bowl run, that kind of, I think, changed things and vaulted him into another tier of star.
Well, okay, here's a question kind of related to that.
Yeah.
ESPN just said Kansas City. Maybe we should start the mailbag here. We'll start the mailbag with this question in a minute. Let me finish that thought before we change topics here.
No, I just think that helped his profile even more. And that's why he's being mentioned, as one of the top quarterbacks, not only in the league, but one of the biggest stars in the league as well.
Right. Let's get into that mailbag. I also want to maybe talk about this Patrick Mahomes quote from Quarterback, the Netflix docuseries, because it also speaks to that Chiefs-Bengals rivalry that you alluded to. And I thought it was a interesting quote. The quarterbacks are coming at it, I think, a little bit differently from a lot of the other players on these teams. But we'll get into those topics and some questions on the defense in a mailbag coming up next.
Our partners over at eBay Motors have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Football host Vinny Iyer to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week, all season long. Whether you're prepping for a draft or scouting the waiver wire, every week we're going to provide you with players that are guaranteed to fit on your roster. So with draft prep underway, let's see who Vinny has picked out for this week's eBay's Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the Week. When making the first overall pick in fantasy football drafts this season, 49ers running back Christian McCaffrey is a guaranteed fit. A healthy McCaffrey is guaranteed to see more than 300 touches again in his first full season in San Francisco and is the centerpiece of the 49ers offensive engine. McCaffrey checks all the boxes: talent, usage, high floor and ceiling. Run with CMC as the guaranteed number one fit in a smooth ride to another year of big numbers. Vinny Iyer from Locked On Fantasy Football is going to help you win a fantasy championship, and eBay Motors knows a championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. Same with your vehicle. With eBay Guaranteed Fit and over 122 million parts and accessories for your vehicle right at your fingertips, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. Air filters, brakes, batteries, taillights, alternators, shocks, struts, you name it, eBay Motors has it. And they'll make sure it's the right fit for your car, because eBay Guaranteed Fit helps you understand exactly what you need for your vehicle the first time. So go forth, switch gears, crank the AC, and say goodbye to sweating if your ride needs a little fixing up, because now you'll know you'll always be set up for success from the get-go with eBay Guaranteed Fit. Everything your vehicle is calling for is just a click away. For the right parts and accessories that fit your vehicle, just look for the green check. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices at ebaymotors.com. That's ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply.
James, before we dive into some listener questions in the mailbag, I do want to talk about this Patrick Mahomes comment, and then I want to ask you a question. I thought this Patrick Mahomes comment was actually a compliment for the Cincinnati Bengals. Some people saw maybe only the end of one of the quotes and thought it was trash talk. But here's the full quote for anyone that missed it. And you have this over at allbengals.com as well, in case you guys want to go read it and not just hear me recite it. I think the Bengals are better, said Patrick Mahomes when asked who he would rather face between the Bills and the Bengals. But with all those injuries on the offensive line, the Bills have a chance. We match up better against the Bills, but I want to play the Bengals. I just want to play them because we haven't beat them, and I'm tired of them talking. Joe Burrow is going to do whatever it takes to win that game. Every single time you go up against that team, I know it's going to come down to the very end.
Yep.
I mean, it's very respectful. He's very motivated, obviously, to win. And if you're 0-3, if the Bengals were 0-3 against the Chiefs, it would be the same thing. It would be, man, let's beat this team. If you're Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals, and there was talking, and that is amplified, and Patrick Mahomes has kind of played into the Jamar Chase thing. I don't think that stuff's a big deal either. I think that's pretty playful, to be honest, but it's motivation. And these athletes, as we've seen from the Michael Jordan documentary a couple of years ago, will use any bit of motivation they can.
No doubt. I agree. I think it is a compliment. Obviously what he said about Joe was a compliment, and that was pre-AFC title game, but pre-divisional round to say, yeah, we think the Bengals are better, but that's who we want to play. That's awesome. And I like seeing that. And that's what makes this rivalry awesome. I don't think that the Bengals, for example, would be rooting for whatever team is playing the Chiefs if they could face the Chiefs again in an AFC title game. I think they would want to play the Chiefs because they think they can beat the Chiefs. That they weren't lacking any confidence. I think they were stunned when they didn't. And that's the beauty of this rivalry, is both teams are really, really, really hard to beat. And it comes down to all these different stars on both sides of the ball, but then obviously the quarterbacks. So no, I love it. And I think that that's one of the best parts about this docuseries on Netflix, is the fact that we're going to see from a Patrick Mahomes view how they view the Bengals. And I'm sure that later in fact, I know in episode 8, they played Mike Hilton's clip that I posted on TikTok. They played that. So I made the doc, but
congrats.
I know, big news. But the point is we'll see plenty of Bengals, I think, during at least parts of this series, which is pretty cool.
It's also nice to get that acknowledgement from Mahomes. For fans on Twitter, they get into it with Chiefs fans every day, which I know happens. I try to not see it, but I see it nonetheless, just because it doesn't interest me. But Mahomes acknowledging the injuries on the offensive line, Mahomes saying that he thinks the Bengals are the better team. I thought those were interesting little tidbits as well, and I think complimentary coming from Patrick Mahomes. My question to start the mailbag, James, is a Jake question. Sorry to all of the people that wrote in questions. We will get to many of those as well. But ESPN just had the ESPYs, and the Kansas City Chiefs were named the best team of the year, or whatever the award was called. But they were up against teams from college ranks, from professional ranks. The Kansas City Chiefs won the award. Would the Bengals, had they beaten the Chiefs and won the Super Bowl, have been the best team in the ESPYs? Because I got to be honest, I'm kind of skeptical. But that would have mean the Bengals had beaten the winner twice and then won the Super Bowl. So in that hypothetical, do you think that ESPN would have made the Cincinnati Bengals the best team, or gone with the Nuggets or one of the other candidates?
I think a lot of people will say no. I will say, yeah, because that would have meant they would have won 12 straight games and would have won an Arrowhead for a second straight year and would have taken down Jalen Hurts and a really great defensive line for the Eagles, probably shorthanded in the trenches. So, yes, I think so. If they had done that. Now, they were as close as they were to the Super Bowl, they were miles and miles away from finishing it and getting the Lombardi. Like that final minute plus a whole another game, you know how many things go into that to get it done. But they, I think they would have been. And I think because that would have meant Burrow playing out of his mind, Chase big plays. And these guys are stars. Like Joe Burrow, the only guy he isn't a bigger star than is Mahomes as of right now on the Chiefs. And Jamar Chase is going to be a bigger star than Travis Kelce. Might not be yet, but I think he's going to be, certainly among the younger fans. So I do. I think that they would have been.
Interesting. I mean, it's the hypothetical that we'll never get the answer to.
We may find out this year. Obviously, circumstances will be different. But.
Yeah, because there's like other teams involved too, right? Like the Georgia Bulldogs college football team were a nominee as well. And they're comparing them to others in their respective arenas, which it makes it tricky. Let's get into our mailbag questions here, James. We'll take one question on the defense before we get to a bunch more in the third segment to finish the show. But Bengals Watch Party at Bengals Party had a question about the interior pass rush, James. How do you see the interior pass rush playing out? What are the options? This is something we've talked about a little bit, but I figured there's enough there that we can have a little bit of a conversation.
Yeah, I would think they would love for Zach Carter to take a step, certainly, and be part of that. Obviously, you have BJ Hill. We know what DJ Reader brings, but specifically pass rush, they would love to have Zach Carter step up a bit. And then after that, I think you're talking Cam Sample, and you're discussing still, at least to a degree, Joseph Osai. And could Miles Murphy be inside, play inside some, or is it the opposite? Because you have Miles Murphy, because you're confident in Joseph Osai, that you put Sam Hubbard inside. I think that's the interesting part. And that's probably where I would go if you could, at least as of now, is put Hubbard inside at times, because he's a great run defender. I think he would be good in there, certainly has the size in there, and might have the edge over some of these interior guards that he would face in an interior lineman. So we'll see, but that's kind of the picture. Those are the guys that I would expect to see. And in a perfect world, Zach Carter would take a few steps forward. I've heard he's put on some good weight, so we'll see if he does that. But if not, one of these other guys, they're going to have to kind of tool it a little bit. And I think Lou Anarumo can. I also wouldn't be shocked if they did kind of scour not the waiver wire, maybe the waiver wire when cuts happen, but scour the free agent market if they could find the right 3-tech.
Yeah, it's one of those spots we talked about with Jay Morrison earlier this week. So if you missed that episode, you can go check out our conversation with Jay Morrison as he's getting set to join Pro Football Network. They tweeted about that, by the way, James, which I didn't see until hours after the tweet. But that was kind of neat. We keep getting picked up.
It's cool.
Which is cool. But DJ Reader was their best interior pass rusher last year. Not known for pass rush, but really was the guy disrupting the pocket the most, getting the most push up the middle, compressing the pocket, not giving quarterbacks an avenue to step up. And he got so hot with getting his hands into the passing lane and batting passes at the line of scrimmage, which was a big deal. Like he went a lot of the season without doing it, and then he finished the season with 6, and he had more of those. I guess that includes the playoffs according to PFF, but got his hands into the passing lane quite a bit. They do need more there. One guy that we haven't talked about, and I think rightfully so, but we'll see if he can take a step, is last year's waiver claim J Tufele, who when he popped, and he had a couple games where he really popped when he needed to play when DJ Reader was hurt, he was really good in a couple of games. And so if they can get that to be a little bit more consistent, that would be pretty cool. Zach Carter, for all the late season growth he showed, and he did play a lot better late in the season, I think a lot of that came in run defense. So we'll see if he can add some pass rush to his game. It was an area that was going to need some development. He was, changing positions in the NFL a little bit in terms of the role he was going to be asked to play. So we'll see if the body transformation helps there. BJ Hill, I think, kind of is what he is at this point. He's going to be a really solid player. He's not going to be a top end pass rusher. but he will contribute in the pass rush. Certainly, he's shown that he can do that from time to time. He will make some big plays there. But you're looking for a little bit more probably for a team that was accustomed to Geno Atkins for all those years. Don't think that's on the team right now, but how they deploy those defensive ends in the NASCAR package, which I think is a sub package we're pretty interested in seeing, is something that we'll be watching throughout training camp, and is something that we're probably going to talk about a little bit in the training camp preview, or previews, I should say, that we'll have going next week. Coming up next, some more questions about sub packages, leadership on defense, and more on the mailbag as we finish up today's episode.
Today's show is brought to you by Bird Dogs. Bird Dogs, well, they make you look good. Whether it's their khaki shorts, their awesome joggers, you're going to look good, you're going to feel good, and, well, it is the best product on the market. And let's just start with their khaki shorts. They're designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and give your leg a truly sculpted look. So this summer, even if you don't hit leg day, well, you'll look just fine with Bird Dogs. They use anti-stink sweat wicking fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long. I love their shorts. I love their joggers. I love their khakis, and I wear them all the time, whether it's in the summer with the shorts, during football season, if I'm going to practice, joggers, they come in clutch. So you need to go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL or enter promo code LockedOnNFL for a free Yeti style tumbler with your order. Again, that's birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL or promo code LockedOnNFL for a free Yeti style tumbler. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off. We promise you. Again, that's birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL.
James, we have a question about the safeties. Jordan Battle turning some heads. We've talked about 3 safety looks. I've unfortunately lost the questions in this exact moment. I'll get them back up. But if you have that question, that would be great.
Andrew at @whodaydad_. Do you think the Bengals will realistically run more of a 3 safety look if Battle looks good in camp? I thought it would have helped our injured defensive backs last year and get Dak some reps. And how about Jake, the computer whiz, losing the questions? Just have to mention that.
I switched my Twitter accounts for a second there. I've got the questions back now. No,
it's okay. But there we go. We have the question.
Yeah, Houdaydad_ on Twitter with the question here. We've talked a lot about 3 safety stuff. We talked about it a lot last year too. I'm not sure how much more 3 safety stuff we'll see. And the reason for that is to put 3 safeties on the field, you're taking either a linebacker or a defensive back off the field, right? So the way we see 3 safety stuff is if Dax Hill on third downs on passing downs against teams with a good tight end takes over that Trey Flowers role. Where last year they had a cornerback come on the field, they took Jermaine Pratt off the field, and they had that corner out there to deal with tight ends like Travis Kelce. I do think Dax could do that. I worry about him a little bit in terms of size he's giving up, although that was an issue for Trey Flowers to some extent as well with some of the big tight ends in the NFL. But that would be the situation where you would see the 3 safeties come on. I think I can't imagine, any base situation where that would be the case. You could see some rotations, but we'll find out. I think this is one of those training camp questions, one of those things that I'm going to be watching for in training camp is, do they actually put those 3 safeties on the field at any point in time against certain looks and certain situational stuff when they're drilling it? But this is a big wait and see. I'm actually a little bit skeptical the closer we get that we'll see a whole lot more in terms of 3 safety stuff outside of the sub packages where they had an extra defensive back on the field anyway last year.
Yeah, I think the rotation is the key here. To me, if they were going to go 3 safeties, last year would have been the year where you have 2 guys that you're really, really confident in this guy and Dax Hill. And people forget, Jay mentioned it on our last episode. Dax had a great camp before Jesse showed up. Was really good in the preseason, looked comfortable at safety, and then just was out, and that was it, and wasn't playing much. Like, he did everything he could do to get some playing time, and I don't think they're built that way, but I think that you'll see some Nick Scott Dax Hill, and then some Dax Hill Jordan Battle, and that'll be kind of what you see, and then maybe some Nick Scott Jordan Battle, a little bit of that too. And you could just see them kind of rotate a bit. I think Dax will play the most snaps. I think Scott will be second, followed by Battle. But I certainly think that there's more of a path now to three safeties playing regularly on defense, even though they might not be on the field at the same time.
Yeah, we'll see. Because we felt this way last year too, right? You just said it. Last year was the year we thought we would see it, and then we didn't. So I think it'll be situational. It'll be matchup dependent. I think that's a bigger part of it than the personnel the Bengals have. It's does the matchup call for it? Because, like I said, somebody has to come off the field, right, to put three safeties on the field, and you're only doing that in certain matchups.
Yep, and I think that the confidence in Jesse Bates, Von Bell last year was certainly at least a big part, actually, of Lou Anarumo's decision-making there. All right, we got time for one more. You want to go with the Von Bell question?
Let's do it.
JoJo Jammer at Win One Super Bowl. Hopefully it's more than one, JoJo. Who is going to set the tone for the defensive backs now that Von Bell is gone?
I think we've heard the defensive back room in Cincinnati talk about this, right? Some of the veterans, like Cheeto's talked about it a little bit. Mike Hilton's talked about it a little bit. And those are the two guys that I'm looking at, but one of them's in the last year of their deal. At some point, Dax Hill is going to need to step up and be a leader. I don't know if this is a year for that with some of the veterans they have. Cam Taylor-Britt, certainly vocal. Will he be a future leader in that room? I think it might be too early there. I'm looking at the veterans. I'm looking at Cheeto and Mike Hilton. And Mike Hilton has 2 years left on his deal, so especially Mike Hilton. But I think both of those guys are the veterans in that room that have the experience. And I think that those two would be the ones that would try to continue the tone that they've had. And they've talked about this, I think, where it's going to be a group effort. There's not going to be one guy that comes in and does what Von Bell did. It's going to be somebody else organizing the film rooms. It's going to be somebody else organizing the loaf jar, right? And that was a tradition that came over with Mike Hilton. So maybe that's him anyway, right? But they've got a couple of veterans there, and Nick Scott's been around for a while at this point too. This is going to be his 5th NFL season, so I would be looking at primarily those two corners, and we'll see which of these young guys can step into a leadership role.
Yeah, I think Nick Scott, you got it at the end there. I think he's certainly going to be in the mix there and establish himself. I honestly, I don't know how much leading it needs to be done for a guy like Jordan Battle, for example, as a rookie. Like I think he's ready to go. And then the other one I would look at is Michael Thomas in that safety room, just a guy that's a steady, calming presence. So overall, I think they'll be fine there from a leadership perspective. There may be some bumps. Anytime you lose guys like Jesse Bates and Von Bell, it could be tough. But overall, I think they'll be just fine in the secondary. Yeah,
there's a lot of youth there, but there are still some veterans. Plenty of guys that have been around the league for a long time. Michael Thomas, really good shout. Sidney Jones has been around the NFL for a while now too. But it's just those things that they did in the DB room last year that I think they're going to look to continue. The extra film work that they did, the loaf jar stuff. Somebody needs to continue to run those, continue to set the tone. And I think they've got the guys, and most of these players were on the team last year and had that experience to continue and carry that forward, because there is that camaraderie, and they seem to really enjoy it. That's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. If we didn't answer your question, well, it might be a full episode next week. You never know. We do that sometimes in the offseason when your questions align with some of the things that we have planned anyway. So you might see that, but we're going to get into a week of training camp previews in addition to whatever else comes up that's newsworthy, because we've got to keep you covered here on Locked On Bengals. Until then, thanks for listening to this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Hoo day, and have a good one.